Perfection. So hard to achieve, yet we expect it from almost everybody. But what's the one type of person we expect it the most from? That's right, physicians. Face it, you're not going to put your life on the line if there's only a 99% chance of a surgery succeeding. You need 100%. But doctors are only humans. They make mistakes too. Brian Goldman talks about this in his moving TED Talk, Doctors Make Mistakes. Can we talk about it? I think we have to do something about a piece of culture of medicine that has to change. And I think it starts with one physician, and that's me. And maybe I've been around long enough to afford to give away some of my false prestige to be able to do that. Before I begin with the meat of my talk, let's begin with some baseball. Hey, we all love baseball, don't we? Baseball's full of amazing statistics. Say you have a batter who bats 300. This means he's hitting the ball 3 out of 10 times safely. Do you know what they call a batter who bats 300? Good. Real good. Maybe an all-star. Do you know what they call a batter who bats 400? Who, by the way, is hitting the ball 4 out of 10 times safely. Legendary, as in Ted Williams legendary, the last baseball great to ever hit over 400 during the regular season. Now let's take this back into my world of medicine, where I'm a lot more comfortable, or perhaps a bit less comfortable, after what I'm going to talk to you about today. Say you have appendicitis, and you go to a surgeon who's batting 400 on appendectomies. Somehow this isn't working out, is it? Now say you live in a certain part of a certain remote place, and you have a loved one who has blockages in 2 coronary arteries. Your family doctor refers this loved one to a cardiologist who's batting 200 on angioplasties. But, you know what? She's on the comeback trail, and this year she's batting 257. Somehow this isn't working out. But I have a question for you. What do you think the perfect batting average for a good nurse practitioner or physician or orthopedic surgeon is supposed to be? 1,000. Now the truth of the matter is, nobody in all of medicine knows what the perfect batting average for a good surgeon or a good physician or a good paramedic is supposed to be. But what we do though, is we send each and every one of them out into the world with the message, be perfect. Never, ever, ever make a mistake. But you worry about the details, about how that's going to happen. And this was the message I absorbed when I was in med school. I was an obsessive compulsive student. In high school, one of my classmates said Brian Goldman would study for a blood test. And so I did. And I memorized everything. In my anatomy class, I memorized the insertions and origins of every muscle, every branch of every artery that came off the aorta, differential diagnosis, obscure and common. And all the while, I was amassing more and more knowledge. And I did well. I graduated with honors cum laude. And I came out of medicine with the impression that if I knew everything, or as much as possible, as close to everything as possible, it would immunize me against making mistakes. And so it did. For a while. Until I met Mrs. Drucker. I was a resident when Mrs. Drucker was brought into the emergency department at the hospital where I was working at. And at that time, I was on the cardiology service on the cardiology rotation. And it was my job to see the patient when the emergency staff called for a cardiology consult and report back to my attending. and I saw Mrs. Drucker. She was breathless. I listened to Mrs. Drucker. She was wheezy. I could hear crackly noises on both sides. This told me she was in congestive heart failure. And it wasn't a difficult diagnosis to make. I made it, and I set to work on treating her. And after a while, she started to feel better. And I felt really good. And that's when I made my first mistake. I sent her home. Actually, I made 2 more mistakes after that. I sent her home without speaking to my attendant. The second mistake I made was much worse. In sending her home, I disregarded a little voice inside me saying, "Goldman, not a good idea. Don't do this." In fact, so lacking in confidence was I that I asked the nurse who was looking after Mrs. Drucker, "Do you think it's okay if she goes home?" "Yeah, I think she'll do fine," the nurse replied very matter-of-factly. And I signed that discharge papers. And all that day, that afternoon, I had this gnawing feeling inside me. But I carried on with my work. And at the end of the day, I did something that I don't usually do. I walked through the emergency department on my way home. And it was there, another nurse, not the nurse who was looking after Mrs. Drucker, who said 3 words to me that was the 3 words most ER physicians dread. The 3 words are, "Do you remember?" "Do you remember that patient you sent home?" she asked very matter-of-factly. "Well, she's back," in just that tone of voice. Well, she was back, all right. She was back in near death. About an hour or a half or 2 after I sent her home, she collapsed and had to be brought back to the emergency department, where she had a blood pressure of 50, which is in severe shock. She was breathless and she was blue. And the emergency staff pulled out all the stops. They gave her medications to raise her blood pressure. They put her on a ventilator. And I was shocked and shaken to the core, because after they stabilized her, they sent her to the intensive care unit, where I hoped, against hope, that she would recover. But after a day or 2, it was clear that she was never going to wake up. She had irreversible brain damage. And the family gathered, and at about the 8 or 9 day mark, they let her go. Mrs. Drucker, a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. They say you never forget the names of those who die. And for the first time, I experienced the unhealthy shame that exists in our culture of medicine, where I felt alone, isolated, not feeling the healthy kind of shame that you feel because you can't talk about it with your colleagues. The unhealthy shame that I'm talking about is the one that makes you so sick inside. It's the one that says not that what you did was bad, but that you are bad. And it was what I was feeling. And it wasn't because of my attending. He was a doll. I'm quite sure he smoothed things over and made sure I didn't get sued. And I kept asking myself these questions. Why did I send her home? Why didn't I speak to my attending? And at my worst moments, why did I make such a stupid mistake? Why did I go into medicine? Slowly but surely, the shame lifted. And on a cloudy day when there's a crack in the clouds and the sun started to come out, I started to wonder, maybe I could feel better. If I only resume my efforts to become perfect, maybe I could feel better. And so I went back to work until it happened again. And I went through that same period of shame, recriminations, felt cleansed, and went back to work until it happened again, and again, and again. When was the last time you heard somebody talk about their own mistakes? Oh yeah, you go to that cocktail party and hear about some other doctor talk about another doctor's mistakes, but you're not going to hear somebody talk about their own. That's the system we have. It's a complete system of denial. It's a system where there are two types of physicians. Those who make mistakes and those who don't. Those who can't handle sleep deprivation and those who can. Those who have lousy outcomes and those who have great ones. And here's the thing. We're taught that if we root out all the error-prone health professionals, we'll be left with a safe system. But there are two things about that. Mistakes happen every day in medicine, where 1 in 10 medications are either the wrong ones given or the wrong dosage, where hospital-acquired infections are getting more and more numerous each day. And here's the thing. We live in a world of medicine where knowledge is doubling every year or two. We can't keep up with it. So if you take the system, as I was taught, and weed out all the error-prone health professionals, you will be left with no system. The redefined physician is human, knows she's human, accepts it, isn't proud of making mistakes, but strives to learn one thing that she can pass on to other people. She's supportive when other people talk about their mistakes. And she points out other people's mistakes. Not in a gotcha way, but in a loving, supportive way. And the system is evolving to create backups to point out mistakes where other people may have missed and are rewarding for doing so. And especially people like me, people who come clean about mistakes, are also rewarded. My name is Brian Goldman. I am a redefined physician. I make mistakes. I'm not proud of it, but I strive to learn one thing that I can pass on to other people. I still don't know what you think of me, but I can live with that. And I'd like to close with 3 words of my own. I do remember. Thank you.